And it's a Jew who people owe something to him, and he wants to have the last pound of flesh. I don't think that any anti-Semitism is present in that this is rather accidental. But nevertheless, he wants to give him the last pound of flesh. So he was a well-read man. He had read Huxley, he had read Shakespeare, and then comes something else in the back. He said, the communists say, from everybody according to his ability to everybody according to his need. And then he describes capitalism, from everybody according to his ability to everybody according to his greed. He transformed the sentence, which was quite smart to do. So he had it with the American capitalistic system, but he was not willing to change over to a communistic system. He was not ready to do that, and therefore he was really caught. Now, if we look at for a moment from a religious point of view, or use religious language, the American society is a polytheistic society. That means we don't have poetical names for these gods. We call war war, but we don't call it Mars. We call wealth, but we don't call it Pluto. We have porno, but we don't call it Venus, or Aphrodite, or whatever. But without those names, these forces are at work in our society. They take a lot of time of our society, a lot of energy, a lot of work, and therefore they are our real gods. On Sunday, we will pray to Yahweh, to El Shaddai, to Adonai, the one God, but during the week, we serve one or the other of this Aphrodites, or Venus, or Mars, or whoever may be, whatever may be our field in which we operate. So now, this man, obviously, his God was his property, which he had accumulated, and that is where his whole energy went, and symbols of that were his airplane, Cessna, and his boat, and his house. And he came to a point that when this divinity, this God, was destroyed, there was nothing for him to go on living any longer. Not even his young wife, that is amazing. Not even his baby, which had just been born. One should think that he could have said, okay, the IRS takes my property, my money, but, I still have my wife and my child. It was not enough. That means the concentration of him in these commodities, because money is the universal commodity against which you can exchange all the others. So if money, for instance, the accumulation of money is your God, to which you spend all your energy and your thinking and whatever, and speculation, and then somebody comes and takes that away, and you have lost your God. That means your ultimate concern proves to be not ultimate. And that is the final disaster, because there is no meaning left anymore, and you don't know why you should go on living. So that is another dimension of him. There is not one religious word in this whole thing. So he had no religious, or whatever religion he had, it was not substantial for him, as Hegel would say. It was just something which everybody in Texas has. Most Americans say, I believe in God or whatever, it's absolutely meaningless. So therefore, it didn't hold. Whatever he may have had, and there's no expression of it, it did not hold. What his real God was disappeared, and his life became nil. He died in nihilism. And wanted to take some people with him. He at least had an enemy, somebody who destroyed his God, and that was the IRS. So it is important that we see the problem which we have, the unbelievable suffering which that system in which we live produces for people, which at the same time is ideologically covered up. So when the press talked about him, what did they say? He's a loner. Wait for the next catastrophe. Wait for the next shooting in the elementary school or in the university. What they will say right away is, he is a loner. You know what that means, he's a loner? If he had been conformed to this wonderful society, he wouldn't have done a thing like this. That means the society is good. There's nothing wrong with the society. So therefore, there's only something wrong with this individual. Damn it, loner. That is what is wrong. See, this is an ideological statement. And these ideological statements is appearance. It is necessary appearance. It is necessary for the stabilization of our society. That is what is called ideology. It's called false consciousness. It's called the masking of class and national and race interest. And so we have to keep that up. We pay millions of dollars a day in order to keep that appearance up. And whatever contradicts this appearance, this guy flying into the IRS building, he will disappear in 1 or 2 days and they will never mention him again. But he has existed and this horrible tragedy has taken place. So our question is, what kind of a mindset can bring about changes, and can the Pope and the Catholic Church, with this powerful tradition, with this over 1 billion people, can they give us an alternative so that we can diminish this unbelievable suffering which gets these extreme expressions in those cases, but you have to think that millions of people don't go to this extreme, but still have the same suffering. Okay, so this, and do we have any comment to this before we go a little bit further in our Caritas in Veritate? I wrote it the wrong way there, bad Latin there. Page 3, it means Caritas in Veritate. Last thing there, contemporary issue. A Canadian theologian, great theologian, Gregory Baum, wrote me a few days ago, and we have mentioned it already. And he said the following thing. Let me see if I can still reconstruct it. He said that the Pope argues against relativism in civil society, and that he sounds like Pius X. Pius X wrote, and I would say by 1830 or so, he wrote an encyclical which was called Syllabus. And in the Syllabus he condemned everything modern. He condemned liberalism and fascism and socialism and capitalism and everything. And so this Pope is very known for his pessimism concerning the present civil society. He's a patristic person. His focus of his studies, where he is a scholar, are the fathers. The Greek fathers of the Greek Orthodox Church, and also the Latin fathers. So Augustine, for instance, would be a Latin father, and others from the Greek Orthodox Church. So, and he has studied all their documents. They were enlighteners at that time, these church fathers. They read the New Testament in terms of Plato, and they were very critical of the Roman civil society, in which all kinds of things like homosexuality and lesbianism and all the things which you have at the end of a civilization accumulated, and they opposed it on the basis of the New Testament, but which they understood in the Platonic sense. And Plato was from the very beginning an enemy of civil society. Karl Popper wrote that book, The Enemies of the Open Society. He brought up all these philosophers and prophets who attacked our type of society, which is between the family and the state, civil society. This is what is in crisis. This is what the government now tries to control. And this is what the Roosevelt liberals are not able to control adequately at this moment. So Plato wanted to rescue the family, and particularly the state of Athens, and therefore repressed this civil society with its armies of lawyers, with its individualism, with its subjectivism, and he forbid certain music which stimulate, like we have the same music nowadays, which stimulates this type of civil society. This civil society does not only destroy the family and the state, it destroys the environment too. And therefore it destroys the very nature on which, or the very basis on which society is established. All city-states died from civil society as if it was a cancer which ate them up. The unbelievably unique situation in which we are is that all our European friends, by the way, the right now argues Obama wants to make us European. We don't want to become European, but we don't want to have the health plan of the Europeans or whatever. So, but nevertheless, all the old states died from civil society. So that suddenly this civil society developed between the family and the state and destroyed both sides, citizenship and family life and the environment, and particularly industrial community production. And so, but the strange thing is that our society alone started as a civil society. That means with all the others, the state existed first and then civil society developed after centuries. With us, we started with families coming over here, and these families started trading with each other in marketplaces and so on. So civil society was developed, but there was no sheriff yet. Only slowly the sheriff came. And slowly, 50 miles away in Lansing, a judge came. And then finally, we also had a capital. But we put the capital into the swamps of the Potomac River in order to express our contempt for this government. And the Tea Party people have that same contempt for this Washington there. This is where hell is really. And Lansing is a little hell, but Washington is the big one. And of course, this cowboy there who flew into the building there, he, of course, the redneck, represents this. And now, I don't want to make jokes about this, because we owe it, to recognize every person. And so we have to recognize the truth in the Tea Party people and in this man who sacrificed his life in order to make a statement. Because there is, of course, some truth in this, right? There was some truth in liberalism, in this energetic individual who takes care of himself and never gets a heart attack and therefore doesn't need any health insurance. There is some truth in it. He was an industrious person. He worked hard on his farm or in his store and so on. So, and in a certain sense, this is what made America great. So, but it means that civil society evolved much faster than the state, and therefore that the state has a hard time to keep the civil society under control. And you can see this when Obama goes to Wall Street, and gives them a new sermon, don't be so greedy and so on, and they laugh at him. I have people on Wall Street whom I know, whom I meet almost weekly, and they laugh. It's like when you talk to an alcoholic, you shouldn't take so much alcohol or whatever. Now, they want to pay back some of that stuff. They got the money, the banks, in order to give the money as loans in order to move the economy so that people could be employed again, but they want to pay it back. It is more important for them to pay it back. Why? Because when they are federalized, they are under federal control. That means the federal government determines their wages and their bonuses and so on, and their trips and all this. So it is more important for them to free themselves from the state control than to do their job for which they got the money in the first place, namely to give it to people so that they can build houses now and can get cars or whatever, so that others can build houses and produce cars and so on. Because what is a depression? The depression is the result of overproduction. And since there is no plan, they have overproduced cars, but they continue investing in these cars in spite of the fact that everybody has already 2 or 3 damaged cars and doesn't need them anymore. Instead of shifting the investment into another branch of production and into hospitals or school or highways or getting the damaged electricity down under the ground that not with every storm the lights go out. So that I had to put a generator into my house. So that is what is wrong, That means since for us the civil society was there first and the state only slowly developed and always scarce in terms of money, never enough money. As long as I'm here, 45 years I'm here, the president came recently during a Senate meeting and he called behind me there and he said, "You must have heard this before." I said, 45 times I have heard it. 45 times I said, "I have heard that you told us that there was no money, only the guy had another face than you had. He was a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. I mean, you're the smallest one, but nevertheless, they always said the same thing." So because that civil society doesn't want to pay anything for the state. The state is like a monastery or a church, unproductive. It doesn't produce commodities which you can sell for a high price. They always tell me I should sell religion somehow. That means even religion is made into a commodity. And if you don't, and you can get rich, you know, with religion. They just built, when you go to the airport, on the left side there is the old cathedral of the Anglicans, the Episcopalians. They built some kind of a people's palace right beside it. I mean, it's tasteless to compare these two styles, you know. I mean, it explodes your eyes when you just look at it. You get a heart attack in your car, you know. But this is, they make money with it, you know. It's one of those evangelical groups who bring the sinners together and they pay a lot, you know, for dancing around and so on. So, no, this is also not fair, you know, to talk that way. But, I mean, there is, you know, there is commodification going on of religion as well, and you can make a lot of money with it. And, of course, religion for us is not a state affair. The First Amendment is against any state church. That means against the Anglican Church in the colonies. And so, therefore, they are all private, and they compete with each other like a corporation, and they produce commodities, you know, religious commodities for people, and sometimes it's a good income. Billy Graham had about $12 million a year. Schüler, who replaced him now, has $60 million a year. These are massive incomes, and the capitalists do not pay that for nothing, you know, so they must have a good, some kind of a function for the stability. They have an integrated function for the civil society and its survival, and therefore they are paid very highly. But if that is in the sense of that what Moses had in mind, or Abraham, or Jesus, or Mohammed, or whatever, or Martin Luther King, or Evers, or Malcolm X, that is a very, very, very doubtful, very, very doubtful. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah.
you, but the thought has occurred to me that the people have an obligation to hold both their political leaders and their religious leaders accountable.
Right.
Okay? When they do not hold them accountable, these people are free to do whatever they want with no accountability.
Exactly.
Okay? So that's what the problem is.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You remember Benjamin Franklin said, "We have given you," when someone asked him, "What kind of a government have you given us?" He says, "Well, we have given you a republic, but only God knows if you can keep it." So the onus was on the people to keep it.
Right, yeah. It's absolutely right, yeah. But the people, insofar as they are not only private citizens and businessmen, but insofar as they are real citizens as well. So how many people feel now that the federalization of General Motors means that we now own General Motors?
Yes.
I don't think they feel it that way. No, they don't, but we do. We do. See? And so the question is, you know, in other language, Americans are 4 years bourgeois. They are concerned with their particular good. And then during the elections, they become citoyens, they become citizens. We must become full-time citizens. We must become citizens also during the week or whatever, during the month and during the years. Because what you say, that we have to keep these people, these leaders, you know, would mean that you are informed and that you know exactly what they do from day to day. And it can be done today because we have the television, you know.
We have the television, we have the internet, and
Right.
also we have the ability, there are certain states that if a certain person is elected and he does not live up, or he switches what he was elected to do. In other words, if he runs on a certain platform, gets elected, and then switches and does whatever he wants to do, which is not the will of the people, that person can be recalled before his term is completed.
Yeah, right.
Not all states have that, but some do.
Some do, yeah.
And so, you know, we should be able to do the same thing to this president, or any president.
Yeah.
You know, if he goes, you know, if the wheels fall off the cart, and this guy is totally different than what we thought he was.
Right. Yeah. But it needs a well-informed electorate and citizenship. And some of these questions are very complicated. See, what we see is these people who oppose that and want to have it all cancelled again, you know, what both houses have decided now about this plan, they have decided something, and now they want to undo this all again and start from the very beginning and so on. You know, what is going on in those people? They say the American people don't want you, President, your health thing there. But who are these American people they talk about? You know, if they would say some American people are against this and some American people are not against it, so we don't know exactly. You know, they all claim that they have the whole American people behind them.
Who does?
I mean, for instance, in this discussion yesterday, McCain said, you know, the American people don't want this plan.
He was talking that in general,
Yeah,
the
in general.
bulk of the American people.
Yeah,
And so that he just shortened he got right to
yeah,
the issue. He said
Right.
American people
right.
overwhelmingly, in parentheses,
Mhm.
do not want this program.
Yeah, right.
And the other party is hell-bent on ramming it down your throat.
Right. Yeah, right.
They don't even know what's in it. I mean, 2,400 pages, you ask these people, they never read it.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, what's that all about?
I think the representatives have not even read it.
That's right.
Right. Okay, we have finished this one thing up now, you know, our contemporary issues, and now, where are we? We want to have our little movie there, but let me maybe make one step further. So we are on page number 3 there, the Papal Encyclical. That's what we are all about. Benedict XVI has written a new encyclical, so that's our point. Love in Truth. It remembers Paul VI social encyclical letter, Progressio Populorum, which I want to show you and I don't have, from 40 years ago, as well as all the other papal social encyclicals since Rerum Novarum. No new things are happening. That was the first encyclical letter. And Quadragesimo Anno, that was 40 years later. So that all happened 50 years after Karl Marx. The church discovered that there was something wrong with industrial commodity production, or what is called, in a specific sense, capitalism. So now it produced enormous suffering for the fourth estate. Let me say what that means. I introduced that in order to clarify things a little bit. The fourth estate during the French Revolution was the working class. The working class did not make that revolution. It was the third estate which made that revolution. So what we call here the middle class, and what they call the bourgeoisie. The low bourgeoisie and the middle bourgeoisie made the revolution. And the documents which they wrote, the encyclopedias of which our constitution is a part, were written sometimes by members of the second estate, by the clergy. For instance, Talleyrand, Bishop Talleyrand wrote a lot of that stuff. And sometimes also by the first estate, which is the king and the nobility. So these are the four estates. The revolution was made by the third estate. The small bourgeoisie were the Jacobins, who were the most radical people, and they demanded that the king would be guillotined, and his wife and the Dauphin. And they also finally wanted to have the bishops guillotined or exiled and so on. Talleyrand is an interesting guy. They just celebrate him in France and in Germany at this moment because of some kind of an anniversary. But Talleyrand was ordained as a bishop, and he was not a real bishop. He was not a theologian or anything, but he was the man who would celebrate 1 year after the storm against the Bastille. He would celebrate a mass in remembrance of the victory of the Third Estate. So there was a combination between the church and the Third Estate, in spite of the fact that the church had always been on the first estate and had itself been the bishops, the Second Estate. But it goes on further. Talleyrand went to the National Assembly and asked for the secularization of all church property. When you hear the name secularization, it meant first of all, very simply, the secularization of church property. And most of the land in Germany and so on was owned by the church. So it was a bishop of the Catholic Church who went into the National Assembly and asked for the nationalization of church property. And the state would promise then that the state would pay the clergy, which is not the case with us, right? So the clergy in France is still paid. And when Napoleon came to Germany, he did the same secularization and promised at the same time that the clergy would be paid. And the clergy was paid then, even under fascism. The concordat between Rome and the church and Hitler included the payment of the clergy. And this concordat is now valid still. Hitler concordat is valid for the German Federal Republic. And also in East Germany, the German Democratic Republic also paid the clergy and so on. So that means the state feels that since they took over the church property, secularized it, that they had a right, they had the duty then to pay the church, pay the clergy, which, you know, we have another development here, of course. So we had Napoleonic law in New Orleans, but not even there we introduced that. Okay, so this this is our point now, that we get this clear what is going on there. So a church which was always on the side of the feudal lords for 1,000 years, that is important, or in South America on the side of the feudal lords and then of the capital owners, the big estate owners and so on. Suddenly, when the Third Estate comes about, joins for some time the interests of the Third Estate. But when the Third Estate began to persecute the church, the Pope in Rome attacked the Third Estate and separated the church from the Third Estate. And a struggle came about, and then Pius X wrote that syllabus, condemned all accomplishments of the Third Estate, and only in Italy the church state was dissolved. The Pope became a prisoner of the Vatican, and up to John the 23rd, the Pope would not even leave the Vatican. Only John III went to a hospital suddenly, and then, of course, John Paul II traveled all over the world. These are all new type of developments. So, but in protest, the Church against the Third Estate throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century, and so on. And also this fatal thing, you know, that the Church allied itself with all fascist states in Europe, had something to do with the prophecy of a Spanish diplomat who said that with the fall of the First and the Second Estate, with the kings, dictators would come about. And some dictators would come from above. They were bourgeois dictators, I mean dictators of the Third Estate. And some dictators would come from below. They would come from the Fourth Estate. They would be socialistic dictators. And so he recommended to the Church that they should ally themselves with the bourgeois dictators. And that is why they made a Lateran treaty with Mussolini and made the Concordat with Hitler and Franco and Salazar. And then saw when fascism was beaten and liberalism won over them, then they of course had a horrible shock. And John the 23rd tried to overcome that shock. And from that time on, we have a critical political theology, and we have a liberation theology, which then Ratzinger, Benedict, is still repressing up to the present. So that we look through this whole thing and know what the conditions are there. Now, when Napoleon says, you know, that the Church is always with the bigger battalions, and they have repeated that also the fascist government of El Salvador would say the same thing against Romero. The government would say that the Church is a whore, That means whenever a new estate moves into the foreground, the church leaves its loyalty to the old one and goes to the new one. So when Romero's liberation theologians suddenly joined the fourth estate and left the third estate, they said, here we have it again, the church is a whore, and so on. So the church only slowly left the feudal lords and after they were guillotined, and then joined finally the third estate, and now we have to see in this encyclical letter what this encyclical letter is really doing, on which side is he really. This environmental movement is not a movement of the fourth estate. Gore is not a member of the fourth estate, he's a very rich guy. He belongs to the third estate. So it means, or when he visits, the White House or so, it means that he has some approachement. He is not entirely like Pius X. He tries to get along with the third estate as long as possible. The victorious neoliberal counter-revolution of 1989, the Pope John Paul II played an important role through the Solidarity movement in Poland to overthrow the fourth estate government, the communist government, and replace it by a third estate government again, and so on. So the church was deeply involved in this victorious thing. But of course, 18 years, of course, after this tremendous victory of neoconservatism and neoliberalism, it leads us into this horrible disaster, and almost a similar thing happens to us, which had happened to the Soviet Union. So that is the situation in which we are, and we want to have help in this situation, and that is why we study this encyclical letter. So, but nevertheless, so what I say here, it produced enormous suffering for the fourth estate, or the proletariat, or the working class, or today it's called the precariat. That means people who have a very precarious lifestyle from day to day. And even for the lowest level of the third estate, that means the bourgeoisie or the low middle class. The Democratic Party has in recent days begun to talk about working class. During the campaign, they talked always about the hard-working low middle class, or about Joe the plumber. Both parties talked about this. That is the low middle class, which is a leftover of the Middle Ages, and has a very hard time under the third estate, because from below the labor unions push, and from above the big chains push, and you can see it in town, the little stores in the middle of the city, which are always supported by the city to make a go of it, and so on, and then after 3 years they disappear anyway, and so on. So both parties appeal to that middle class all the time and say they really employ everybody, which is not really adequate, I think, but nevertheless, that is our struggle at this moment. So Joe the plumber, or what is called in France the petit bourgeoisie, the small bourgeoisie. The church developed its own social theory called solidarism, we said, between liberals on one hand. So on one side, the philosophy of the third estate, they were critical of it. But on the other hand, they were critical of socialism too, which is the philosophy of the fourth estate. So somehow the church tries to find a middle way between the two classes, between the third and the fourth estate. Is that really tenable? That is the question. So solidarism means a position between the third estate, the bourgeoisie, and the fourth estate, as well, the workers. And there is something which I just want to put in there. We talked already about de-Hellenization, and we said that the Pope fights against de-Hellenization. So that the Pope is for Hellenization. He's Aristotelian, that means Hellenization. But of course, Aristotle and Plato were, of course, slaveholders. And that means they emphasized, of course, the slaveholder system. They emphasized private property. And so the church has taken that over. That means all encyclical assert the right for property, private property ownership. And that would be okay, but it's not only of consumer goods, but it's of productive goods. That means the private ownership of the means of production by which the modern commodities are produced en masse. And the owner of these productive means, these machineries, he does not only conquer nature and transforms nature into food and clothing and housing, But these same means of productions are also controlling those who are working with them. That means those who do not own these means of production have to sell themselves to those who own the means of production. And those who sell themselves are the fourth estate. And those who have the means of production and buy them, that is the third estate.
Right.
So the question is now, where does the Pope stand? And I think the encyclical letters are somehow the attempt of a middle way between two classes fighting with each other. Our labor unions and our labor law, one of my sons is a lawyer who is in the labor law, is an attempt to tame this class struggle and to control the owners and the workers and do justice to both of them. So somehow the encyclical letters are open toward what the third estate is doing in this country, which is in total control of this country. And at the same time, they also don't want to forget the fourth estate. And so the encyclical, for instance, talks a lot about labor unions and the right of labor unions and the right to organization and so on and so on. So nevertheless, want to finish that up here. In order to deal with the human suffering produced by capitalism, the Church began to side with the fourth estate after it had just made itself familiar with the third estate. It is obviously not easy for the Church to find its way through all of this. The alliance of Church and fourth estate continues today in the form of the basic Christian communities, or the critical political theology of Metz, or the liberation theology of Gutierrez, as well as in the form of the new papal encyclical letter Caritas in Veritate. But the encyclical letter does not really agree with what Romero did. They want to forget Romero and his liberation theologians. So that means they went too far. They went too far in identifying themselves with the fourth estate. The Romero should have gone to the inauguration festivities of the fascist leader of the Arena Party, and he didn't. And that has something to do with his death. So why they want to forget him is that he let himself be dragged by the liberation theologians too much to the side of the poor, as this is called. When the Church calls about the poor, then they mean the fourth estate. So that is the situation in which this encyclical is situated. So, and we don't have to accept it or whatever. Our task is to understand where the Church stands and how it tries to maneuver and what dangerous points there are, and if it can be of any help, if this solidarism can be of any help. Fourth of the American population are Roman Catholics. Fourth of the army officers are Catholic. Fourth of the House and the Senate are Catholic. So when this birth control thing came up, health plan should not have any payments for abortions and so on. That's where this fourth there of Catholics who banded together in order to push that through and endangered somehow the whole process. So there are dangerous points there, so we have to see, and that's what we want to study for this encyclical.
Did you want to have time for your film?
Right, yeah. So now the question is, we want to see what this encyclical is to apply to, and how do we get some kind of a picture of the of our situation also in our own neighborhood here and so on.